Anytime I'm on the stage select screen in Sonic Adventure 2, I'm always intrigued by the sheer existence of some of these levels. Metal Harbor, City Escape, Skyrail, just to name a few of the greats. And even the ones that aren't great, they can rest comfortably knowing that they are considered for that Sonic Adventure 2 fix I crave. Like everyone, however, I always gravitate towards the Sonic levels before anything else especially. Those icons with the infamous blue blur are filled to the brim with excitement and anticipation. Except one. Cannon's Core. No one really talks about this level, which is unfortunate as Cannon's Core is the final stage of this beloved game. The level that united the two sides together for a great display of courage, hope, and heroism isn't talked about. It's a stage we play once for the story, twice to complete the missions, and finally a third to A rank it all, but hardly ever just to have fun. What sealed the fate of Cannon's Core to render it to a chore more than an actual fun experience? The dark story had concluded on the note of Eggman's success, but threw a curveball by the ominous text that the audience got to see as Eggman blindly believed he had finally won. The last story would unlock after this with a cutscene that continues exactly from the moment where the dark story ended. Eggman is unable to fire the Eclipse Cannon for an unknown reason, until an elderly man appears on the screen, Gerald Robotnik, aka Eggman's grandfather. The cutscene then warps to Sonic and Knuckles entering the research facility, obviously confused and worried about the vibration of the Ark as Rouge enters, bringing the dire news that the Ark has launched itself towards Earth, traveling at a speed great enough to cause mass destruction, likely capable of wiping most, or if not all, of humanity out. The screen within the research facility then activates, displaying the image of Gerald Robotnik, much like we had seen with Eggman before. A CG cutscene then begins, with Gerald Robotnik denoting that the Ark's collision with Earth is a death sentence for both the humans and the planet itself, explaining that it will all come to an end within 27 minutes. That's 27 minutes to go from a normal life to suddenly realizing that whatever kind of day you had leading up to this point, whoever you love, the achievements you made in your life, in 27 minutes it'll all be wiped out and erased from existence. This is your end. And you don't know why, you don't know how, you don't even know what it is. But you have 27 minutes to accept that you won't be alive for much longer. The following scene ensues, where Tails and Amy are now present in the group, watching the screen as Gerald, on the cusp of execution, explains that he's been planning for his vengeance to unravel once the Chaos Emeralds were collected, adding that this plan was in fact irreversible. His world, what he loved, who he loved, was ripped away from him. And he wants nothing more than to ensure the human race feels that same sense of suffering that he had to endure up to that point. He leaves his thoughts at that and is implied to be executed shortly after. Eggman then enters the research facility, explaining to everyone that yes, Gerald Robotnik is his grandfather, also the man he aspires to become. After some banter, Eggman then hands Rouge his grandfather's diary, where we get to learn more about his past. The diary opens with a retrospective take on whether Project Shadow should have even been created in the first place. Of course, Shadow was designed to help humanity out, but the military didn't see it that way, instead opting to destroy what was left of the Ark and seizing Shadow in the process. All Gerald could do during the raid was wish for his colleagues and Maria to be safe in the process of it. The diary then plays a later entry with Gerald trying to contemplate the motive of the Ark being shut down, assuming it was to prevent its advanced research from being taken advantage of by someone else who would abuse that power. However, the shutting down of the Ark was labeled as an accident, obviously trying to keep the truth out of the public's eye. Gerald would then eventually learn that Maria had died during the raid and of course blamed himself. His will to live his life withered away, and with the only thought in his mind fixating on taking revenge. Gerald acknowledged that his thoughts became progressively more deranged and maddening the more time went on, and ultimately he just wanted that pain to end. In the last part of his diary, Gerald declared that Shadow was finally complete, a mind that was meant to be perfect, relying on Shadow to take care of what was left for him to do. Pure vengeance. And with that, Gerald ended on a note that if one desired the world's destruction, awaken and release Shadow to carry it out, making the start of the dark story come full circle. The intentions that Eggman had at the start of Adventure 2 by awakening Shadow has to come to a pause because what matters now is saving the planet, leading to our characters discussing how the world can be saved, which Rouge timed in, remembering that Knuckles can use the Master Emerald to reverse the Chaos Emerald's energy. With a plan, time is of the essence, but it's established that Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Eggman, and Rouge have to pull together to create a final array of hope. Because if they fail, it's the end of all things life. The last story opens on a note that ends up being very deep and tragic. We watched a mind that was greater than even Eggman's working to better humanity by creating Shadow. But the creation of a good intent is what scared the Guardian units of nations into eventually raiding the Ark and murdering an innocent 12-year-old girl. That would then rob that same caring and genius mind of any joy, sanity, and accomplishments that he once had, leaving him to suffer, dement, and wither away. Gerald Robotnik's body lived to share the tale, but his mind and heart died when Maria did. This story is what brought Sonic Adventure 2 from being just good guys versus bad guys and instead expanded it to be something that impacts the heart and promises a story we'll never forget. It needed 6 minutes and 52 seconds to accomplish this in the last story. 6 minutes and 52 seconds to set up the first step in the closing act of Sonic Adventure 2. Canon's core, without even entering the stage, has been set up so beautifully by a deep story and the greatest stakes we've seen thus far. The heart and soul of Sonic Adventure 2 has never fired as hard as it is in this moment. Sonic Adventure 2 was originally going to serve as the final adventure for our favorite Blue Hedgehog, and with a story as deep and powerful as this, it was no more evident than it is now. So why does it seem to falter as we begin to play the stage? It opens with Tails and the mech. We all have our opinions about the mech stages, yes, but they can be good. However, aside from the time switches, everything here feels relatively familiar. It probably has to do with the fact that the enemy selection and the aesthetic, aside from it being purple, is basically a carbon copy of Eternal Engine. And whether you want to call Eternal Engine good or bad is up to you. But as a final stage, I already feel turned off because I cannot help but feel it's all too familiar to the levels before. Color palette doesn't automatically make an aesthetic unique. There needs to be more than just recoloring your walls and floors. And yes, while Crazy Gadget was this but green and Eternal Engine was teal instead of purple, Lost Colony dark and gray, I can forgive most of that because at least those stages aren't trying to stand out. Canon's core, however, should have had an aesthetic that stood out more, making the arc feel more ominous and dire than what it ends up being. To its credit, starting at Rouges Sections and onwards, they do deviate from the usual aesthetic, eventually claiming something that is their own. But we'll get to that later. Stage opens with Tails' mech section. From a gameplay standpoint, this is satisfactory level. But again, as said before, it feels like Eternal Engine. Same aesthetic? Check. Same enemies? Check. It really just lacks any identity other than the time switch feature, which is handled decently here. The first instance of it is seen when you come across the spinning spike balls that are moving too quickly to safely travel across. It leaves the player curious about this never-seen-before mechanism located in the middle of the room. You'll quickly learn that it stops time, but it's indicated early on it only lasts for so long through its incessant beeping before time resumes. The player would instantly understand how the time switches work by the end of their first use, which is great design for an introduction. There are a couple issues I do have with the time switches, but they are minor and we'll get back to them soon. One thing I can appreciate is that some of the aspects of the stage are more difficult than the stages before it. Mech stages do usually provide decent platforming challenges, and Canon's core takes that and creates harder variations of such without coming off as being too brutalizing. Everything else in this section and on is relatively fine and doesn't really need to be talked about all that much. One thing I will bring back up is the minor issues I have with the time switches. This stage has some elements where you have to time your shot with the time switch. However, messing up your shot can often mean 5 to 8 seconds of recovery and trying again. On the surface, it's usually relatively harmless. Most of the time you aren't outright punished for missing your window, but failing to achieve such can often result in a massacre of your flow. which, given the fact that this is a mech stage to start off with, is already a pre-existing issue that becomes glaring once we incorporate the time switches into it. Can it be avoided? Yes, it can. But can you accidentally activate the time switch before you intend to? Oh, quite easily. Or on the other side of things, you could be looking in its general direction and not lock on. And by the time you do, you mistimed your shot, now you gotta wait 5 seconds, try again, and hope it works out. At no point does this issue become anything more than minor, but it does exist. Ultimately though, that sums up 2's section pretty well. It feels somewhat uninspired and lacking creativity, but it adds a new gimmick that's handled well, albeit not perfect. It'd probably rank as about a 6 out of 10 for me. It's alright. Flawed, but alright. Eggman's section comes up next, and already I see a large issue. This section is 2's, but slightly harder. We have moving blocks now, which you'll never believe how they function. They move around and can either aid you or get in your way. Time switches are a common feature here, but that issue about timing your shot wrong is even worse in this section due to how you can accidentally shoot a switch, and then one of those revolutionary moving blocks stops moving and blocks you. Get it? The platforming here is made more difficult because in some sections where you need to rely on both the fabled blocks and the time switch, you have your trusty acid below you who will annihilate you should you make a stupid jump. On paper, Eggman's section seems fine, right? 2's teaches you some mechanics and Eggman ups the difficulty. The issue I have is that 2's should have accomplished both the introduction and the hard variation of said challenges in his section, leaving Eggman to test your newfound knowledge in more creative ways that don't just piggyback off of the section before it. A final level should almost always be reminiscent of a gauntlet, and with the way Cannon's core is designed, to have 5 different sections means there should be 5 unique types of hurdles to overcome. Eggman doesn't offer any unique hurdles in his section, so it ends up feeling redundant to get through. Out of 10, I'd have to score his part with a 5. Next up comes Rouge, and it's a section I'm okay with. Her section finally brings a new look to her surroundings, where it's not just a palette swap, but it's new designs and details put on the walls around us, so it gives the aesthetic more life. Our first challenge is to hit this time switch, and when we do so, the game will give us a context clue that tells us that the current coming from the wall is stopped, and this is what we have to advance to next. It's brief, it's simple, but it's effective, and that's good design. The small challenge here does come off a little bit slow and methodical, dragging out for a little bit more time than it's worth, but it's still passable. I don't mind it too much. Next, we have to activate the time switch at just the right moment so we're able to squeeze through a small gap and enter the next room. We will meet an artificial chaos who has a switch stuck up her ass. Now that the water drainage button is ready to be activated, all we have to do is backtrack the way that we came, which isn't a long distance at all. There's a small test of knowledge that can be done here through a shortcut. If you are successfully able to time out when you press the switch, you're able to slip through both the acid room and the current in one sitting. You don't have to activate the second switch at all. All you have to do now is hit the button in the middle of the room and you have completed Rouges Section. Rouges Section is rather short, and it was clear they didn't incorporate the greatest of ideas with her. The opening of her section feels like it's meant to draw her section out so it doesn't feel so blink and you miss. I will praise the fact that the gameplay here isn't too bad actually, despite its lack of duration. It's great that whether intentionally or not, you can use your knowledge and understanding of how her section's designed to create a shortcut at the end to finish with a bit of style. I, however, don't believe that Rouge was utilized to the fullest here. There could have been a greater emphasis on her flight ability as a means to navigate, rather than her relying on speed for 75% of it. I'd say Rouge's section is the least offensive so far. There's nothing here that's going to make someone hate this section, but it needed more fleshing out and ideas in order to really reach its potential. Rouge's section gets a 6.5 out of 10. Best one yet, but not by a whole lot. Knuckles' section starts in the upper location of where Rouge's section took place. This was an area that we could not yet access through Rouge, but through Knuckles we can. The expansion of Rouge's playable area is a nice touch though, making the level feel larger as a whole. It also continues with the same aesthetic as Rouge had in hers, which I'm okay with, due to the fact it's the same level in a previously inaccessible area. Challenge that will take place during Knuckles' section is clear as day the moment we spawn in. It's of course a focus on swimming. This challenge is something I'm half on board with. Adventure 2 only utilized swimming so much throughout the game, it being a big focus of Aquatic Mine, a much lesser focus of Dry Lagoon, and unless we are talking Mission 3 of Death Chamber, it was so few and far between that most wouldn't feel super familiar with swimming by the time we make it to this level. But to its credit, swimming has decent enough controls to pick up on it quite easily, so players who don't feel ready won't struggle too hard to succeed in this section. However, I do have to address this early on. Let's talk about the Air Necklace. It's an optional upgrade that Knuckles can pick up in Aquatic Mine that'll allow him to breathe infinitely. But you'll notice that its application in that stage is quite limited because most of us would just rather play the level when the water's drained out anyways. So what's the point in picking it up? Well, it's not until Cannon's Core you'll realize that Knuckles will have a much harder version of his section if you don't have the upgrade. Yes, you have access to bubbles should you need it, but there's enough to worry about the stage that the added anxiety of having to worry about oxygen feels a bit overwhelming. This section can be done without the Air Necklace, but it's recommended to make sure you have it before you begin Cannon's Core. I wouldn't hold this hurdle so much on Cannon's Core as much as Sonic Adventure 2 as a whole though. The Air Necklace doesn't hold any necessity until the very end, which is something that could have been better handled if the game would allot a greater importance to the water sections before Cannon's Core. Most players who are completionists will likely have the Air Necklace by now, so for them it'll probably impact a minority. But for those who are just here to beat the game and move on to the next, you will probably run into this hurdle if you don't have the knowledge, knowing that going into Aquatic Mine, that's probably something you should look into getting. Getting to the actual level though, there is a good variety of challenges that each room provides. Some have enemies you have to dodge while swimming through a gap, some have currents you have to activate a time switch to travel through, and one just has lasers you have to navigate around. It makes for a better sort of gauntlet feeling that Cannon's Core should have had from the beginning, even if the gauntlet in question involves swimming, which up to this point felt so minimal. The biggest downside to this entire section is that it just drags on somewhat due to the slower movement speed that we are forced to endure. To sum it up, for Knuckles' section, Sonic Team did a pretty solid job. Even if there were a couple flaws here, it's worth noting that the good does in fact outweigh the bad. It continues to further improve Cannon's Core's gameplay by giving us a creatively designed segment that, while lasts a touch too long, does a good job at setting us up for the finale. I'd give Knuckles' section a 7.5 out of 10. It was a fine section indeed. Conceptually speaking, Sonic's section feels the most important. After all, Sonic's icon represents Cannon's Core on the stage map, and it's his color that displays for the interface as the stage begins. The section opens with Eggman telling Sonic that it all rests in his hands now to make this happen. It's a nice reminder of what's at stake here. However, the gameplay opens with a design I'd like to call bullshit! No, why do I have to get hit and likely die first thing to learn that it's vital for me to hold forward as soon as I can? I get it's opening with a homing attack, one of Sonic's most iconic moves, but that design is just horrible. Luckily, getting past the section isn't too hard, and we meet with an artificial Chaos P100, or the birthing Chaos as I like to call them. Taking her down, I don't know. Taking the artificial Chaos down allows us to travel to the room on the right. Here we will meet two shield hunters and a float type. That's the name, really? Float type does prove to be a bit of a difficult jumping challenge for Sonic here, but if you're able to do it, then you can move on to the room on the left. Here we have a couple gun hunters, which once we take them out, we can then work on the artificial Chaos P100, giving us access to a time switch where we can take down the Hornet too. Next, we can take a dive in the orange liquid, eventually target the golden beetle over there, and we can get our hands on another time switch, which will allow us to somersault underneath this barricade. For all of our hard work, we get to take a slide down as Cannon's Core comes to an end. While it is as simple as just collecting rings and moving from side to side, I have to admit that it's a pretty fun and thrilling way to close out Cannon's Core. Wait just a moment. We still have to talk about Sonic's section as a whole. Sonic's section here baffles me in a regard. It's not very climactic, it's just so brief that we never get time to do much here. It looks decent, using some new elements that improve further upon the aesthetics already set by the sections before it, but in the end, We destroy some robots, hit some time switches, and then we slide. There's not really a time here where we get to be Sonic. To prove my point, you could switch Sonic's character out with Knuckles or Rouge, and the level would pan out roughly the same. Considering what I had said about Sonic being the face of Canon's core, he winded up feeling like the least important. Why wasn't there any rails grind, or quick platforming that could have been implemented? Was there a time constraint? Like, Canon's core, in a game with Sonic's name on it, felt so underwhelming for his section. It manages to accomplish the bare minimum by not annoying me, but there's still so much lost potential that could have made this section amazing. It's too short and straightforward, so it kind of feels like the developers might have gotten sick of Canon's core before they could finish. Sonic's section has to get a 6.5 out of 10. Even though it is pretty inoffensive as a whole, it's just lacking. This is the final nail in the coffin as to why Canon's core did not work. It's plagued with annoyances, repetition, taking good things away before they can prosper, and just ending on a note that was underwhelming at best. It had everything it needed to be a masterpiece. An amazing story to introduce the stage to us, very high stakes, and a moment of maturity where everyone had set aside their differences and came together to give the world a second chance. But it fumbled in the end. Tails' section was average at best, but it introduced the time switch mechanic really well. Eggman's section was uninspired and boring. Rouges' section, while done somewhat well, was just a little bit too short and contained to prosper. Knuckles did a good job of giving us a well-designed, cohesive section, albeit with some minor issues. And Sonic, the main character of the stage, felt like an afterthought here, giving him just the most basics of design. This was a level that needed greater direction, and in most cases lacked the required understanding to provide each character with obstacles that would not only suit them, but complement them as well. It had a soaring potential when most would just say it's mediocre at the end of the day, and I'm right there with them. 6 to 7 minutes for a level with such an amazing story going into it comes out bleak and uninteresting. This isn't me saying that the last story is tainted by any means. The two boss fights that follow this stage are wonderful in their own right, and they more than make up for Canon's core. I'd love to make a video talking about them someday. In the end, I still love how Adventure 2's story really came together. Even with a stage that couldn't quite support that heavy weight, Canon's core, while not an outright disaster, does remain as an epitome of mediocrity. And that marks my final thoughts. Well everybody, that brings this video to an end. I know that this sort of video is not really something I've ever tried before, and it's really just in a sort of testing phase. If you guys want me to do more videos with this sort of format in mind, I'm more than happy to give it another go. For my first attempt, I don't think this was all too bad, but yeah, this was definitely much more challenging to make than what I'm used to, but it really did feel like it was worth it in the end. However, you guys, as the audience, you will be the ones to make that decision if you feel like these types of videos are ones that you guys enjoy. So on that note, everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day, take care for now, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.